Hello and welcome. My name is Gabriel, and today I'm going to be running you through everything that I have read so far in 2021. In terms of reading, I'm off to a pretty good start this year. I haven't found any new all-time favorites or anything, but I did enjoy everything that I read in January. I reread a couple of old favorites, and I finished a couple things I'd been working on. It's a real mixed batch. Going in chronological order, I'm going to be talking about what was actually the last book I read in 2020, which was Utopia by Sir Thomas More. A lot of you know that at the end of 2020, I was extremely burnt out and I just did not want to read anything. And this is going to sound weird, but usually when I'm not in the mood to read anything, that means that I'm not in the mood for a new story. And instead, my brain just needs to stare at a bunch of words. It's usually when I'm in those moods that I pick up something like nonfiction or poetry, but sometimes a super dense old classic will do the trick. If you're unaware, Utopia by Sir Thomas More is, it's 500 years old. It was written as a satire about a man who went on an expedition to this imaginary place called Utopia where everything is perfect. It's seen as kind of the starting point for a lot of socialist theory. I'm not doing a great job explaining it because I didn't do a great job reading it. I got all the way through and I understood bits and pieces, but a lot of it went over my head. Like I said, I just needed some page of words to stare at for a while, and this did the trick. I was surprised by the lack of plot. The whole imaginary land is just a framing device so that Moore had a vehicle to communicate his ideas. I think I was kind of expecting something closer to Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which, hang on, I have a copy. So this is a very interesting book. It sort of takes the premise of Utopia but does a feminist twist on it. This book is about a group of men who are on an expedition through South America and who stumble upon a utopian society run entirely by women. There are no men, and it is perfect. This book is really fun and it has an interesting plot, but similar to Utopia, it's just a framing device for communicating some ideas, but this book had better developed characters and more of a recognizable novel structure. And of course, this book was written a lot closer to our time period. I think this was written at the turn of the century, so it's closer to what we expect going into a novel. So yeah, I was a bit disappointed that Utopia didn't have that emotional core, but it was still a really cool read, just seeing the beginnings and rumblings of what would grow to be socialist and communist thinking. And really knowing the historical context in which that book was written, it was just fun reading these things that Moore was saying and just knowing how crazy that would have sounded. I didn't rate Utopia. I didn't engage with it on a critical enough level to accurately pass on a judgment of its quality. But I'm glad I've read it. I can check it off my list of classics. And if any of you are interested in checking out Herland, it is fascinating. Charlotte Perkins Gilman, of course, is the author of The Yellow Wallpaper, which is a much more well-known feminist text. But I do have to warn you, since this book was written by, a white woman at the turn of the century, a lot of what this book has to say about womanhood and feminism is deeply rooted in white supremacy and gender essentialism. So take this book with a grain of salt. It doesn't hold up very well to modern intersectional feminism, but it is important to see where our modern social movements got their beginnings. So next, this is the first book that I started and finished in 2021. I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Cloon. This book is about a man who is a social worker for a bureaucratic government institution responsible for documenting and raising magical creatures and children with magical abilities. In this book, the main character, whose name I have already forgotten, yikes, the main character is given a super important top secret assignment to go to an orphanage on an island where a man is raising 6 children with extremely powerful magical abilities. Some of them even have the power to potentially bring about the end of the world. And it is this man's job to take note of how this orphanage is being run and then report back to his agency. and then report back on whether or not it is a suitable environment for these children. But of course, when he comes to the island, the children are nothing like he expected, and the man who is running the orphanage is nothing like he expected, and it is a really sweet and charming story about found family. I had no idea what to expect going into this book because it's marketed as adult fantasy, but like the cover design and a lot of the writing makes it feel closer to a middle grade. But the main characters are like fully grown adult men. So it's a difficult book to pin down in terms of like marketing category. But I think a lot of the charm in the book comes from the fact that it isn't limiting itself for what it can be. You know, there are a lot of directions that a story like this can go, and it explores all of them. And it fully commits itself to being this weird and whimsical and wonderful little thing. I gave this book 4 stars. It's really charming and sweet. Some parts can come off really corny because it is just like overwhelmingly earnest. But yeah, it's just a fun time, and I don't read that many books that are written with the express purpose to like make you happy, but that's what this is. After that, we get into the books that I actually have physically here with me. I read Seance Tea Party by Raymena. This book is about a young girl who feels like all of her friends are growing up faster than she is. And so one night when she is bored and doesn't have anyone to hang out with, she has a seance and discovers that she has a ghost living in her house. And the book is really about this ghost friend helping her realize that it's okay to still want to play pretend and believe in magic while also keeping up with your friends. And it also has this fun plot about trying to figure out who this ghost was, how she died, and who she knew when she was alive. I rarely see a graphic novel as colorful as this. Usually writers will just pick like 1 or 2 colors for their palette, but this one is just a beautiful rainbow. It's really cute. It's clearly written for like a younger audience, but it's got some beautiful art. Oh, and it was given to me as a gift by my friend Kat, which was very sweet. After that, I decided to reread an all-time favorite, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I am obsessed with this book. It was on my favorite books of 2020 list, and I have thought about it every single day since I read it like almost a year ago. This book is about Richard Paypen, a young Californian who travels across the country to go to this tiny liberal arts college in New England. Oh, God. There he enrolls in a exclusive classics class where he and his peers study ancient Greek and Latin and commit a murder. I've been wanting to reread this basically since I first finished it, and then my friend Dasha from the channel Mythic Pages mentioned that she was interested in picking it up, so we decided to buddy read it, and the whole time I was going through this, we were texting back and forth our thoughts on our favorite scenes and our favorite quotes, and I really, truly understood how much I love this book because of this reread. The first time I finished it, I immediately told myself, this is it. This is my favorite book ever. And then I read a bunch of books after it, which I loved just as much, but which I thought were maybe better constructed. But after this reread, I think that I'm comfortable giving this as an answer when people ask me what my favorite book is. Because I think the first half of this book is absolutely perfect. I cannot find a single fault with it. But then the second half, the stakes get really high. Because of that, some really strange characterization choices were made, and the plot just becomes really unstable. And then the last, 10 to 20 pages were not satisfying to me after my first read. This time, I was completely fine with the ending, now that I've had some time to digest exactly what it is and how this all goes down. I was a lot more okay with it my second read through. Maybe I just picked up new things. I think I will tell people that this is my favorite book because I think that this perfectly represents everything that I want from a book. Because number one, it has got some incredible writing. Donna Tartt is so witty and just smart. It's just brilliant. But it has also got an incredible plot, placing this murder plot in the university setting. Dasha called this the holy grail of dark academia, and I think that's a perfect description. Plus, it has got amazing characters. I am so invested in every single one of them. Even though they are terrible people, they are so compelling and funny, and I, of course, didn't agree with everything that they did, but I was on board with them for the ride. So yeah, It's not a perfect book, no book is, but it is perfect to me. And I hope to read it again and again, many times in the future. After that, I had another reread, and that was The Lost Hero by Riordan. This is the first book in the Heroes of Olympus series, which I plan to reread in its entirety this year. This was always the book that, the first time I read the series when I was like 11, this was the book that I did not enjoy at all. I just thought it was so boring talking about these new characters, and Percy isn't even in it. But now, knowing how the whole series goes, it was fun to just come back to this, especially since in the year since I first read it, I have grown nostalgia for the characters like Leo and Piper and Jason. I don't have a lot of observations about this one. I remember reading this when I was 11 and thinking that these characters who were like 15 were so grown up. And now this time reading it, I was like, oh, they're babies. I did definitely feel the length of this book. I mean, it's a middle grade, so it reads fast, but it's like 500 pages, and the whole time I was thinking about how the Percy Jackson series, which came before this, was able to tell stories which were just as crazy, with just as many characters, but they were like 300 pages shorter. Maybe his editor just didn't care anymore. That was such a harsh critique. No, this book is really fun. I love this series with my whole heart, and I know it only gets better from here. This book also just reawakened the Greek mythology beast inside of me, because there are so many references in this to a lot of ancient Greek plays and epics that I have been meaning to get around to. Like, of course, this book had a lot of references to Jason and Medea and the Argo. So after I read this, I was like, oh, I should get a copy of the Argonautica so that I can read about, the original Jason and the Argonauts. And then once I finish the Argonautica, I was like, oh, and then I can read Medea, because I have the play Medea by Seneca, translated by Emily Wilson. But then I remembered that I've put a ban on getting new Greek epics until I have finished the Iliad. Which is what brings me to my final book of January. Are you ready? Are you ready? I don't think you're ready. You're not going to believe this. After 6 months, I have finished the Ennis Rees translation of the Iliad. If you have been here since the beginning of my channel, you will know I picked this up in July, and I was not having a good time with it. I picked this up with Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey fresh in my memory, and that was the style that I was hoping to find in this translation by Ennis Rees, and they just didn't match up. And the thing about the Iliad is that it is a lot more repetitive than the Odyssey, because you have these massive walls of text which are repeated over and over again, just talking about a different soldier or a different boat each time. And I felt like this translation wasn't poetic enough to justify that. What I mean is, this is written in verse, it's broken up into lines, but it reads a lot like prose. Because the Iliad, in its original Greek, would have been a long-form sung story or an epic poem which originated in the oral tradition, and so those repetitive phrases would make it feel like a song. But since this doesn't read like a song, the repetition just felt really tedious and weighed it down. So I gave up on this, although I didn't tell myself I'd given up, I just put it on the back burner. And then 6 months later, I had all but abandoned it until I read this, and I was like, okay, we're on a Greek mythology kick, let's just get it out of the way. So I picked it back up, and I don't know what's changed, but I was just at a really interesting part, halfway through, and I read all the way to the end in a day. And I think that I was completely unfair of my read of this translation 6 months ago, because in the second half at least, the poetry shone through so clearly, and there were tons of really beautiful lines. In fact, one that I underlined and want to read to you now because I've just been obsessed with it since I read it. He says, "O Father Zeus, deliver the sons of Achaeans from this great darkness, clear the air and enable our eyes to see. If kill us you must, then kill us, O Lord, in the light." Blows my mind. And maybe that line is just beautiful in every translation, but I'd like to think Ennis Rees had a hand in making it sound that incredible in English. This translation does have a couple of quirks that I thought were really funny, though. Number one being how it portrayed the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. Now, I don't know how other translators handle it, because the exact nature of their relationship has been heavily debated for a long time. But it's clear from reading any version that they were a lot more than friends, simply because of the nature of the plot. But you wouldn't know it from this translation, because the way that it portrays Achilles and Patroclus talking to each other for like the first 2/3 is so stilted by like respect and militaristic camaraderie. And then in the final third of the book, when, spoiler alert, but it's 4,000 years old, Patroclus dies, Achilles has this enormous, like, mental breakdown, and he's, like, sobbing and wailing for days, and it's what motivates him through the end of the book. I feel like this translation didn't give the reader a very clear idea of just how much Achilles and Patroclus meant to each other, so Achilles' eventual meltdown felt really melodramatic in contrast to the relationship that we had been shown. Also, this translation had a very interesting way of talking about the gods. And I say interesting because it was very Catholic. A lot of times when the humans in this book would talk to the gods, they would talk to them as if they were addressing, like, the capital G God. Like, even in that quote that I read, he says, "Oh, Lord." And I want to read some other translations so that I can get an idea if this is something that everybody does. I don't know. I thought it was worth noting because, while I thought it was cool because it gives modern readers, like, a framework that they can comprehend, but at the same time, reading it, it feels really strange because you know on some level that this is just not exactly the way that ancient Greeks conceptualized their gods, and the relationship that they had to their gods was not in any way a mirror to Christianity. But yes, I made it through. I think that this has some really powerful language, and the stories within this book come across no matter what. And I'll have to read another translation before I say this, but I think I might even like the Iliad more than the Odyssey. I know. Don't tell Emily Wilson. But do tell her to speed up her translation of the Iliad. And that is it. That is everything that I read in January. My thoughts were all over the place, but I did a good job of getting myself back into the swing of reading after kind of taking December off. And now in February, I have been on the grind. I think I've already finished like 2 books this month, and I've been taking really thorough notes. So my next wrap-up is probably going to be a lot better structured than this one was. If you liked this video, give it a big thumbs up and comment down below your thoughts on any of these books that I mentioned today, or tell me about what you have been reading lately. And if you are new here, go ahead and hit subscribe and click the bell icon so that you get notified every time I upload. That is all, but I will see you guys next time.